in the vast emptiness of the Montana wilderness, where the nearest neighbor is 20 miles away and the stars shine brighter than anywhere else on Earth. A simple transaction between strangers becomes a gateway to the impossible. When rugged cowboy Jack Morrison offers cash to a mysterious drifter named Sarah to watch over his remote cabin, he thinks he's found an easy solution to his problem. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and when Jack decides to follow Sarah home one fateful night, he discovers something that will shatter everything he thought he knew about reality. What he finds behind the door of her rundown trailer isn't human. It is a creature from another world, something that should only exist in science fiction nightmares. This is a story about trust, survival, and the moment when two worlds collide in the most unexpected way. Sometimes the monsters we fear are real, and sometimes they're the ones who need our help the most. Jack Morrison had been working his family's cattle ranch in the Paradise Valley for 37 years, and in all that time, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. The woman standing at his door didn't fit any category he knew. She was somewhere in her late 20s, thin as a rail, with dark circles under her green eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her clothes were worn but clean, and she carried herself with a strange mixture of desperation and dignity that made Jack pause before sending her away. "I heard in town you might need someone to look after your hunting cabin up in the mountains," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious nervousness in her hands. "I'm good with maintenance, can handle basic repairs, and I don't mind the isolation." Jack studied her carefully. His cabin, nestled deep in the Absaroka Mountains, had been sitting empty for months. It was a 2-hour drive on rough forest roads, far from civilization, and he'd been worried about squatters or bear damage. He'd mentioned needing a caretaker to Bob at the hardware store just yesterday, never expecting such a quick response. "It's pretty remote up there," Jack said, crossing his arms. "No cell service, no neighbors. Just you and whatever wildlife decides to visit. The work isn't hard. Keep the place clean. Check for leaks or damage. Make sure the generator's running. I'd pay you $300 a week, cash." Something flickered in her eyes, relief, maybe, or hope. "That would be perfect. I'm Sarah, by the way." Sarah Chun. They shook hands, and Jack felt the calluses on her palms. She'd done physical work before. That was good. He gave her the keys, drew a map to the cabin, and watched as she loaded her few possessions into a battered Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better decades. As she drove away, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was running from something. But then again, most people who sought out that kind of isolation were. For 3 weeks, everything went smoothly. Sarah sent him weekly reports through the post office box and town brief, professional notes confirming that everything was in order. The cabin was secure, the water pump was working, and she'd even repaired a loose shutter. Jack paid her through an envelope left at the general store, and the arrangement seemed perfect. But Jack Morrison wasn't the type of man to leave things to chance. On a cool October evening, after finishing his ranch work early, he decided to make an unannounced visit to the cabin. He told himself it was just due diligence, making sure his property was truly being cared for. But truthfully, his curiosity about the mysterious Sarah Chun had been gnawing at him. The drive up the mountain was beautiful as always, with aspens turning gold and the first hints of snow dusting the highest peaks. When he arrived at the cabin just before dusk, everything looked immaculate. The windows were clean, firewood was neatly stacked, and he could see fresh tracks in the dirt from Sarah's car. But Sarah herself was nowhere to be found. Jack waited for an hour, but she didn't return. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, he began to worry. Where would she go at this hour? The nearest town was 40 miles away, and there was nothing but wilderness in every direction. Then he remembered seeing tire tracks heading east, toward an old logging road he'd almost forgotten existed. Against his better judgment, Jack decided to follow those tracks. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she was okay. but deep down, he knew his curiosity was getting the better of him. The logging road was barely passable, overgrown with brush and rutted from spring floods. His truck bounced and scraped for nearly 30 minutes before he saw a light ahead. There, in a small clearing, sat an ancient Airstream trailer that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But Sarah's car was parked beside it, and warm light glowed from its windows. Jack parked his truck a safe distance away and approached on foot, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. As he got closer, he heard Sarah's voice, speaking softly, and another sound he couldn't quite identify. Something between a hiss and a purr, rhythmic and strange. Jack crept up to the trailer's dirty window and peered inside. What he saw made his blood run cold and his mind rebel against the impossible reality before his eyes. Sarah was kneeling on the trailer's floor, carefully wrapping what looked like a severely injured creature. Jack's rational mind tried to make sense of what he was seeing, but every explanation crumbled against the evidence before him. The being was roughly humanoid in shape, but covered in scales that shimmered between glue and the lantern light. Its head was elongated, with large, dark eyes that held an unmistakable intelligence. One of its arms, if it could be called that, hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and there was a deep gash across its torso that leaked a dark, viscous fluid that definitely wasn't blood. "I know it hurts," Sarah was saying softly, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she cleaned the wound. "But I need to get this infection out before it spreads. You've been hiding it from me for too long." The creature made that strange sound again, and somehow Jack understood it was acknowledgement, maybe even agreement. He watched, transfixed, as Sarah worked with the tenderness of a nurse and the skill of someone who had done this many times before. The trailer's interior was cluttered with medical supplies, both human and other. There were devices he didn't recognize, glowing softly with their own light, and containers filled with substances that seemed to move on their own. Jack must have made some sound, a gasp, a shifting of weight, because suddenly Sarah's head snapped toward the window. Their eyes met through the grimy glass, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Terror flooded Sarah's face, followed quickly by resignation. The creature tried to move, to hide, but it was too weak and fell back against the cushions. "Please," Sarah said, though Jack couldn't hear her through the window. She stood slowly, hands raised, and moved toward the door. Jack stepped back as the door opened, and Sarah emerged into the cold night air. She didn't run. She didn't make excuses. She just stood there, waiting for his reaction. "What the hell is that thing?" Jack finally managed to say, his voice rough with shock. "Her name is Zara," Sarah said quietly. "And she's dying because I can't get the medical equipment she needs. The infection is spreading, and human antibiotics don't work on her physiology. That's not an answer. That's not even close to an answer." Jack ran a hand through his gray hair, feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. What is she? Where did she come from? Why is she here? Sarah glanced back at the trailer, her expression heavy with the weight of secrets. "If I tell you, everything in your life will change. You cannot know this. You can walk away right now, pretend you never saw anything, and I'll leave. I'll take her somewhere else, and you'll never have to think about this again." But Jack had never walked away from anything difficult in his life. "I'm already here," he said, "and I saw what I saw. So you might as well tell me the truth." Sarah nodded slowly and sat down on the trailer's metal steps. "Zara crashed here 8 months ago. Not here specifically, about 60 miles north, deep in the Bob Marshall wilderness. A ship ... I don't even know if you'd call it a ship. It's more like a living thing itself. Anyway, it malfunctioned during what I think was some kind of survey mission. The crash killed her crew, 2 others like her. She was the only survivor." "And you found her?" Jack asked, still standing at a distance, ready to run if this turned out to be some kind of threat. "I found the crash site," Sarah corrected. I was hiking, trying to clear my head after everything fell apart in my life. I'm a veterinary technician, or I was, before I lost my license for speaking out about animal abuse at a research facility. I had nothing left, nowhere to go. And then I found her, barely alive, trapped in the wreckage of something that shouldn't exist. The story poured out of Sarah like she'd been holding it in for too long. How she'd spent weeks camping near the crash site, using her medical knowledge to keep Zara alive. How she'd slowly learned to communicate with the alien through gestures, and eventually through a translation device that Zara had salvaged. How she'd learned that Zara's people were explorers, scientists, studying primitive worlds without interfering. How the crash had been an accident, a combination of bad luck and equipment failure. She can't call for help, Sarah explained. The communication systems were destroyed in the crash. And even if she could, her people won't come back for her. It's against their protocols to risk exposure. She's stranded here, and I'm all she has. Jack looked at the trailer, seeing it now for what it truly was, not just a hiding place, but a makeshift hospital, a sanctuary for something that should be impossible. Inside, Zara had managed to prop herself up, and he could see her more clearly now. Despite her alien appearance, there was something deeply familiar in her posture and the way she held herself. Fear, pain, the universal language of suffering. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of impossible revelations. Jack found himself sitting inside the cramped trailer, listening to Sarah explain the intricacies of keeping an extraterrestrial being alive with limited resources. Zara watched him with those large, dark eyes, and through Sarah's translation device, a small crystalline object that projected holographic images and sounds, she told her own story. Zara's people called themselves the Reptilian, though the translation was approximate at best. They had been exploring Earth's ecosystems for 3 generations, carefully documenting species, studying geological patterns, and ensuring that their observations left no trace of their presence. Zara had been a junior researcher, excited about her first planetary assignment when everything went wrong. The malfunction was instantaneous. The translation device rendered her hissing speech into slightly mechanical English. One moment we were conducting a routine atmospheric analysis, and the next, our propulsion system tore itself apart. Kieran and Thomas's died on impact. I should have died too, but you found her, Jack said to Sarah, still trying to process the reality of having a conversation with an alien being. I almost walked right past the crash site, Sarah admitted. It looked like scorched earth, like a lightning strike maybe. But something made me investigate. I found her unconscious, half buried under debris that looked like metal but felt organic, almost like coral or bone. I should have called someone, the authorities, maybe, or the military. But I knew what would happen. She'd become a lab specimen, a prisoner, maybe worse. Jack understood that reasoning better than he wanted to admit. He'd seen how people treated things they didn't understand, how fear turned quickly to cruelty. So you decided to save her instead. I decided to try, Sarah corrected. And I've been failing ever since. The infection that had taken hold in Zara's body was unlike anything Sarah had encountered. It wasn't bacterial or viral in the traditional sense. It was something native to her biology that had turned destructive after the trauma of the crash. Zara's own immune system was attacking her damaged tissues, creating a cascade of inflammation that was slowly killing her. On my world, this would be treated with bioluminescent therapy and genetic recalibration, Zara explained through the device. But here, I have nothing. Sarah has kept me alive far longer than I had any right to survive, but without proper treatment, I will be dead within days. The blunt statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Jack watched Sarah's face crumple slightly before she composed herself. This was a woman who had been fighting a losing battle for months, refusing to give up, even as hope dwindled to nothing. There has to be something we can do, Jack heard himself say, surprising even himself. An hour ago, He hadn't believed in aliens. Now he was volunteering to help save one. Unless you know where to find a Veridian medical facility within a few days' travel, I'm out of options, Sarah said bitterly. I've tried everything I can think of. I've adapted human treatments, used every piece of technology from the crash that still works, even tried to synthesize compounds based on Zara's guidance. Nothing works. That S when Zara made a sound that didn't need translation, the sound of someone who had just remembered something important. She gestured weakly toward a damaged device sitting on a shelf, something that looked like a combination of a computer and a piece of jewelry. The beacon, the translation device, rendered her urgent words. Sarah, I told you it was destroyed, but I was wrong. Parts of it might still be functional. If we could repair it, we could send a distress signal to the nearest Veridian way station. Sarah grabbed the device, examining it with new intensity. You said it was hopeless, that the core processor was fried. I was in shock, in pain. I may have been wrong. Zara's eyes dimmed slightly. A sign Jack was learning meant fatigue or weakness. But even if we repair it, there's another problem. The beacon requires a specific rare earth element to function iridium. I think you call it. A significant amount, and it must be very pure. Jack felt something click in his mind. The Stillwater mine, he said slowly. It's about 100 miles from here. They extract platinum and palladium, but iridium is a byproduct of the process. My cousin works in their processing facility. Both Sarah and Zara turned to look at him. You're serious? Sarah asked. You'd help us get iridium? That's industrial material, probably controlled, definitely expensive. Do you need it or not? Jack said gruffly, uncomfortable with the hope he saw blooming in Sarah's eyes. What he didn't tell them, what he was barely admitting to himself, was that the moment he decided not to walk away, he'd made a choice. He'd chosen to believe in something impossible, to protect something unknown, and to risk everything he had for two beings he'd just met. It was the most irrational decision of his life, and somehow it felt like the most right thing he'd ever done. But as they began to plan, Jack noticed something through the trailer's window. Headlights moving slowly along the landing road, heading in their direction. Someone else had followed the same path he had, and they were about to have company. Lights off now, Jack hissed, moving to the window. Sarah immediately extinguished the lanterns while helping. Zara slid into a hidden compartment beneath the trailer S-bench seat, a modification Sarah had clearly made for exactly this kind of emergency. The crystalline translation device went dark, and suddenly the trailer looked like nothing more than an abandoned shell. Through the grimy window, Jack watched a white SUV pull into the clearing. It wasn't a vehicle he recognized, which was concerning in an area where everyone knew everyone else's trucks and cars. Two men emerged, wearing casual clothes that somehow looked too clean, too coordinated for genuine campers or hunters. They carried powerful flashlights and moved with the purposeful efficiency of people conducting a search. Federal agents? Sarah whispered from the darkness beside him. Maybe, or worse. Jack had heard stories about private contractors, corporate security, people who didn't answer to the same rules as legitimate law enforcement. The way these men moved reminded him more of soldiers than cops. One of them approached the trailer while the other began examining the clearing with his flashlight, studying the ground, the tire tracks, the disturbed earth. The first man knocked on the trailer door, not the polite knock of a friendly visitor, but the authoritative bang of someone who expected compliance. Federal Wildlife Investigation, the man called out. We have reports of unusual activity in this area. We need to speak with anyone present. Jack and Sarah remained silent. The hidden compartment where Zara lay was designed to be undetectable, but Jack could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The man knocked again, harder this time, and then tried the door handle. It was locked, but that wouldn't stop them for long. What do we do? Sarah breathed, barely audible. Jack made a quick decision. Stay hidden. I'll handle this. Before Sarah could protest, he moved to the door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the cold night air, closing the door firmly behind him. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Jack said, putting on his best annoyed rancher voice. "This is private property, and I don't recall inviting any federal agents onto it." The two men studied him carefully. The one who had knocked was younger, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of clean-cut appearance that screamed government work. The other was older, grizzled, with eyes that had seen things they'd rather forget. "Jack Morrison?" the younger one asked, consulting something on his phone. The fact that they knew his name made Jack's stomach drop, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's right. And you are?" "Agent Derek Cole, Department of Interior." "This is Agent Marsh. We're investigating reports of unusual electromagnetic readings in this area, as well as possible meteor impact sites. Your name came up because you own a significant amount of land in this region." It was a decent cover story, Jack thought, but the details were wrong. Real federal agents would have contacted him through proper channels, shown identification, probably arrived during daylight hours. These men were fishing, looking for something specific. "Haven't seen any meteors," Jack said flatly. "And I don't know anything about electromagnetic whatsits. Like I said, this is private land, and unless you have a warrant, I'd appreciate it if you moved along." Agent Marsh, the older one, stepped closer. "Funny thing about these readings," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "They started appearing about 8 months ago, right around the time you hired a caretaker for your cabin. Sarah Chung, I believe. Interesting history, that one. Lost her veterinary license, been living off the grid. The kind of person who might try to hide something unusual. So they knew about Sarah too." Jack felt his muscles tense, preparing for whatever came next. "Sarah's an honest worker who keeps to herself. Whatever you think you're investigating, you're wrong. Then you won't mind if we take a look inside that trailer," Cole said, moving toward the door. Jack stepped into his path. "Actually, I do mind. Show me a warrant or get off my property." For a moment, the tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Marsh's hand drifted toward his jacket, where Jack suspected he carried a weapon. But Cole held up a hand, stopping his partner. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mr. Morrison," Cole said. "The hard way involves federal warrants, property searches, and a lot of inconvenience for everyone involved. The easy way is you cooperate. We take a quick look around, and we leave you in peace." Inside the trailer, Jack knew Sarah was listening to every word. He also knew that if these men got inside, they'd find evidence, the medical equipment, the alien devices, maybe even Zara herself. The game would be over. "Tell you what," Jack said, thinking fast. "I'll cooperate, but not here. My ranch is about 2 hours south. All my property records are there, maps of my land holdings, everything you could want. We can go there right now, and I'll show you everything I own. But this trailer? It belongs to my caretaker, and I don't have the right to let you search her personal property without her permission." It was a gamble, buying time while also appearing cooperative. Cole and Marsh exchanged glances, having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, Cole nodded. "Fine. We'll follow you to your ranch. But Mr. Morrison, if we find out you're hiding something, the consequences will be severe." Jack climbed into his truck, his hand shaking slightly as he started the engine. As he pulled away, leading the two agents down the logging road, he caught a glimpse of the trailer in his rearview mirror. The door opened slightly, and Sarah's pale face appeared, watching them leave. He'd just bought them time, but he had no idea how much. And now he needed to figure out how to get rid of 2 federal agents, or whoever they really were, while Sarah and Zara made their escape. The drive back to Jack's ranch took nearly 3 hours, with the agents following close behind his truck like shadows. Jack used the time to think, to plan, and to wonder how his simple life had gotten so impossibly complicated in just a few hours. By the time they pulled up to his ranch house, dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Jack invited the agents into his kitchen, made coffee, and spent the next 2 hours showing them property deeds, maps, and records that proved exactly nothing. They asked detailed questions about his land, his cabin, his hiring of Sarah, all while studying him carefully for signs of deception. Jack answered everything truthfully, knowing that the best lies were built on foundations of truth. Finally, Agent Cole's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call, and when he returned, his expression had changed. Something had happened. "We need to go," Cole said to Marsh. "There's been a development." He turned to Jack, his eyes hard. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Morrison, and we'll be watching." The moment their SUV disappeared down his driveway, Jack grabbed his truck keys and headed back toward the mountains. He pushed his old Ford as hard as it would go on the rough roads, racing the rising sun. When he finally reached the clearing where the trailer had been, his heart sank. The trailer was gone. The clearing had been meticulously cleaned. No tire tracks, no disturbed earth, nothing to indicate anyone had ever been there. For a moment, Jack wondered if he'd imagined the entire night. Then he saw it, a small mark carved into a tree trunk at the edge of the clearing. 3 lines in a circle, crude but deliberate. Jack studied the mark, trying to understand its meaning. Then he remembered Sarah had mentioned she'd been camping near the original crash site for weeks. This mark might be directing him there. It was a slim hope, but it was all he had. Using his GPS and the vague description Sarah had given of the location, Jack spent the next 6 hours driving and hiking deeper into the Bob Marshall wilderness. The terrain grew rougher, more remote, until even the old logging roads gave way to nothing but wilderness. Just when he was about to give up, he found another mark on a tree, and then another. Finally, as the sun began to set on what had to be the longest day of Jack's life, he found them. The crash site was hidden in a deep ravine, invisible from the air and accessible only by a treacherous climb down a rock face. The trailer was there, camouflaged with branches and netting. And sitting beside a small fire were Sarah and Zara. "You came," Sarah said, and Jack heard the relief in her voice. "I wasn't sure you would. I thought maybe leading those agents away was your way of washing your hands of us. I'm too old to learn new tricks," Jack said gruffly, though inside he felt a warmth at being trusted. "Did they follow you?" "No. We moved the second you left. Zara has equipment that can detect electronic surveillance. We were able to avoid their sensors." Sarah gestured to the fire. "We've been trying to repair the beacon, but without that iridium ... double quotes." Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, heavy container. "Called my cousin from the ranch. Told him I needed industrial iridium for a special welding project. Cost me $2,000 and a promise to keep his name out of whatever trouble I am getting into, but I got it." Sarah's eyes widened, and Zara made that purring sound that Jack now understood meant joy or gratitude. You actually got it." "Told you I would," Jack said, handing over the container. "Now, what do we do with it?" What followed was a crash course in xenotechnology that made Jack's head spin. Zara, despite her weakness, worked with steady hands to disassemble the beacon, while Sarah followed her precise instructions through the translation device. Jack's role was mostly to hold tools, provide light, and occasionally offer suggestions that came from his experience repairing farm equipment knowledge that surprisingly translated to alien technology in unexpected ways. As midnight approached, the beacon began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. Zara made an adjustment with a tool that looked like a cross between a screwdriver and a tuning fork, and suddenly the light brightened, forming a column that shot straight up into the night sky. "Is it working?" Sarah asked breathlessly. "Yes," Zara said through the device, her voice weak but triumphant. "The signal is transmitting. If there's a Viridian ship within 100 light years, they'll detect it and respond." "How long?" Jack asked. Hours, days, perhaps a week. But they will come. Zara slumped back against the trailer, exhausted by the effort. Thank you, both of you. You have saved my life. The three of them sat in silence, watching the beacon's light pierce the darkness. But Jack couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Those agents, he said finally. Cole and Marsh, they knew too much. Someone's been tracking this since the beginning. Sarah nodded grimly. I've been careful, but not careful enough. If they're still looking, they'll find us eventually. Then, we'd better hope Zara's people get her first, Jack said. The Viridian rescue ship arrived 4 days later, materializing in the night sky with no sound, no warning. Just a sudden presence where nothing had been before. Jack had been taking turns with Sarah keeping watch, and he was the one who saw at first a dark shape blocking the stars, growing larger as it descended toward their hidden ravine. The ship was unlike anything he'd imagined. It wasn't metallic in the traditional sense, but seemed to be made of something organic, flowing like it was alive. As it settled into the ravine, Jack felt no heat, no wind, just a sense of displacement, as if reality itself was adjusting to accommodate this impossible thing. An opening appeared in the ship's surface, and 3 beings emerged Viridian like Zara, but healthy, moving with fluid grace. They rushed to Zara immediately, their hissing speech urgent and concerned. Devices emerged from their clothing or bodies. Jack couldn't tell which, and bathed Zara in light that seemed to ease her pain instantly. Through the translation device, one of the Viridians spoke. I am Mascara, medical specialist. This one is Zara Kin Viridian? When Sarah confirmed, Mascara continued. You have done well to keep her alive. Few species would show such compassion to an injured stranger. They worked quickly, efficiently, treating Zara's wounds with technology that made her body glow softly, as if being rebuilt from the inside out. Jack watched in fascination as the infection that had been killing her was literally pulled from her body, dissolving into nothing. As dawn approached, Zara was strong enough to stand on her own. She approached Jack and Sarah, the translation device in her hand. I can never repay what you have done, she said. By your world's standards, you risked everything, your freedom, your safety, your reputation. By my people's standards, you have committed the greatest act of kindness, preserving a life that was not your responsibility to preserve. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't let you die. It wouldn't have been right. And you, Zara turned to Jack. You were a stranger who chose to become family. In 4 days, you gave more than most beings give in a lifetime. Jack felt uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what needed doing. Mascara approached them, carrying 2 small devices that looked like crystalline seeds. We cannot stay longer. Your planet's authorities are already searching this area. But we wish to leave you with gifts. These are communication beacons attuned to Viridian frequencies. If you are ever in need, if your lives are ever in danger, activate them and we will come. It is the least we can offer for saving one of our own. Sarah accepted hers with shaking hands. Will we ... Will we ever see Zara again? Perhaps, Mascara said. The universe is vast, but the threads of connection are stronger than distance. Zara will remember you always, and our people will know of your kindness. Zara stepped forward and did something unexpected. She placed her scaled hand against Sarah's cheek, then Jack's, a gesture of intimacy and trust. Through the device, her voice was thick with emotion. You showed me that intelligence and compassion are not unique to my people. That alone is worth more than any scientific data we could have gathered. Thank you, my friends. The Viridian returned to their ship, Zara pausing at the entrance to look back one final time. Then the opening sealed, and the ship rose silently into the pre-dawn sky, accelerating until it vanished among the stars. Sarah and Jack stood in the ravine, watching the empty sky, neither knowing quite what to say. Finally, Jack broke the silence. So ... what now? Sarah laughed, a sound that was half sob. I have no idea. I guess I need to find a new job, a new place to live. The cabin isn't safe anymore, not with those agents looking. Jack was quiet for a moment, then said, "My ranch could use a veterinary technician. Lots of animals, always some crisis or other. Pays decent. Comes with a place to stay. No questions asked about your past." Sarah turned to him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "You'd do that? After everything?" "Figure, if you can take care of an alien, cattle should be easy," Jack said with a slight smile. "Besides, someone needs to know about all this. Someone I can trust if something else impossible decides to happen." As they hiked back to Jack's truck, carrying the few belongings Sarah had left, the sun rose over the Montana wilderness. In Jack's pocket, the crystalline beacon felt warm, a reminder that the universe was bigger and stranger than he'd ever imagined. In Sarah's pack, alongside her medical supplies, she carried the same beacon and the knowledge that kindness transcended species. Behind them, the ravine showed no sign of what had occurred there. The earth would keep their secret, and the stars would remember the night when a cowboy, a veterinary technician, and an alien from another world proved that compassion knows no boundaries and that sometimes the most extraordinary thing we can do is simply choose to care when it would be easier to walk away.